és Magyarországról. Visszanéztem félutamból, szememből a könny kicsordul. Bú ebédem, bú vacsorám, boldogtalan minden órám. Nézem a csillagos eget, sírok alatta eleget. Én Istenem, rendelj szállást, már meguntam a bújdosást. Idegen földön a lakást, éjjel-nappal a sok sírást.
During the second half of the 19th century, millions of immigrants came to the United States. Cleveland, the rapidly growing city, was one of their favorite destinations. The climate was similar to the European continental climate, and the growing local industry provided job opportunities for thousands of newcomers.
Osztrák-magyar monarchia területéről. Immigrants from the Austro-Hungarian monarchy came mostly during the second half of 1880s. By the end of the decade, they had not only material needs, but also moral and religious needs to keep their families together. Magyars asked the Cleveland diocese for a Hungarian priest and church. The bishop did not understand that people of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy spoke many different languages, so he decided to keep Hungarians and Slovaks together.
The St. Laszlo Church provided enough physical room for both nationalities. István Fördek, the priest, was fluent in both languages. However, the attempt was barren of results. It happened more than once that Hungarians and Slovaks were fighting in front of the church building after Sunday Mass.
Hungarians had left the St. Ladislaus parish. They wanted to pray and exercise their religion in their own Hungarian church, so they asked again the local diocese for help. At that time, there was no bishop in Cleveland, but the temporary leader of the diocese sent a letter to the head of the Hungarian Catholic Church, Kos Vasari, and informed him about the situation. Reverend Károly Böhm from Mária Nostra was selected to come to Cleveland. Böhm Károly a Mária Nostrai plébánost választottak ki.
He was the only one among the applicants who didn't speak or ask about money and salary in his application letter. The 42-year-old man arrived in Cleveland on December 1st, 1892. He immediately began to familiarize himself with the neighborhood and people of the Buckeye area. Károly Böhm was eager to develop his spiritual center for the Hungarians living in Cleveland, and lost no time in tending to his duties as pastor.
He celebrated Mass in the chapel of St. Joseph Orphanage on Woodland Avenue 10 days after his arrival on the second Sunday of Advent. That was the establishment of the St. Elizabeth of Hungary parish.
According to the parish register, Károly Böhm baptized many children during the next weeks. The first baptized child was Johannes on the 15th of December, 1892. Members of St. Elizabeth donated $25 per family. They bought 4 parcels on the corner of Buckeye Road and East 90th Street.
They laid the cornerstone of the church on May 11th, 1893. The construction was so fast that Károly Böhm celebrated the first Mass in the new building less than 4 months later on 8th of September.
The membership of the first Hungarian Catholic parish was rising rapidly. Around 1900, nearly 2 million Hungarians left their country, and 2/3 of them were Catholic. However, Catholics were not the first in Cleveland. The Hungarian Reformed Church was established in 1891, 1 year earlier. They laid down the cornerstone of their first wooden church in 1894 on Upper Buckeye Road, and was opened on November of the same year. Their membership was rising rapidly as well. The first stone church was dedicated in 1904. At the same time, the Ladies' Sick Benefit Society was organized. Similar associations began springing up at other Hungarian churches in the area. 2 years later, Hungarian Lutherans also wanted to build their own church.
In 1906, the church was established by a small group of people that wanted to carry on the Lutheran religion. We bought the Greek Catholic church that was for sale on Lower Buckeye on Rawlings Avenue. And we were there from 1906 till 1941. In 1941, we decided to move to this present location on East Boulevard and Buckeye Corner.
Several years later, Hungarians had 9 churches in the Buckeye area. John Palasic, who was born on Buckeye, and as a member of the Hungarian Historic Society, knows almost everything about their history.
They guarded 10,000 souls at the St. Elizabeth Church, adults and children together. About 5,000 at the St. Margaret. The Reformed Church had 5,000 members as well. There was a Lutheran, a Presbyterian, 2 Baptist churches, a Greek Catholic, several other smaller churches, and there was an Orthodox Hungarian Jewish temple, where they were speaking Hungarian, and they had a Hungarian school.
So, many Hungarians were living in the Buckeye area around 1900. But how did they get there? And who was the first? According to the 1870 census, 99 Hungarians lived in Cleveland. The first who moved to Buckeye Road was János Makranski in December of 1881. He was followed by András Kuzma 1 month later, and they worked for the Eberhard Iron Company. András Kuzma later became famous as Uncle Kentucky in the neighborhood, because he was a man who organized the newcomers and acted like their agent when they searched for jobs or apartments. And he was paid in whiskey, and thousands were coming.
A hajótársaságoknak valami 5000
Steamship companies employed about 5,000 agents in Europe, and those agents recruited young people to come to America. Agents suggested that young people could not lose by coming, and if they didn't like it, they could go back home. The main idea was to make some money, and those Hungarians who came really didn't want to stay here forever. Most of them had no house in Cleveland. They wanted to go back to Hungary and buy houses and farms there. They only wanted to make between $200 and $400, but the average daily salary was about $1 if they had a job. Those who did make more went back to Hungary to show off.
Elmentek Magyarországra, hencegni, hogy mi van nekik. Minden leállt az első.
But everything stopped in 1914. Austro-Hungarian ships were not allowed to enter American harbors.
And Hungarians were not allowed to go home during the war either.
Tudom, hogy apám 1914-ben...
I know that my father and about another 30,000 Hungarians wanted to go back to fight for their country, but they couldn't.
És úgy tudom, valami 30 000 magyar ugyanezt csinálta.
Many Hungarians, however, were able to fight for America. They were soldiers during the Civil War, and some of them fought during World War I against Germany and against their native country, the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. Cleveland Hungarians like Bolog, Boszai, and Kovács served and died in American uniform. The Habsburg Empire lost the war, but Hungary became the real loser of the peace. The 1,000-year-old country was divided into 5 parts and lost about 2/3 of its territory and population.
The country was in ruins after the war. Hungarians who came from Hungary didn't want to go back home, now located in Romania or Czechoslovakia. And Horthy, the governor of Hungary, also suggested that they should stay here, because Hungary had enough problems with refugees.
So, Hungarians who arrived before World War I stayed here forever. They became Americans. They built new houses, new churches, and new schools for their children. On the west side of Cleveland, a new Hungarian neighborhood was growing. Several years later, every seller in the west side market was Hungarian, or at least spoke Hungarian. There are still several shops owned by Hungarians on Lorraine Avenue. It was a strange, paradoxical time. The tragedy of the native country led to the golden age of the Cleveland Hungarians.
The first time Reverend Böhm went back to Europe was 15 years after his arrival. He took with him the plans of the new St. Elizabeth Church, and after he visited his relatives in Hungary, he met with the Pope in Rome. The Holy Father blessed Böhm's plans and his newspaper too.
The 8-page newspaper was known nationwide at that time. It was a significant tool for reaching all Catholic Hungarians in America and helping them to keep their religion. Catholic Hungarians in the United States considered Cleveland as their center in the country. Consequently, many newcomers came to and settled in Cleveland. The St. Elizabeth Church had become too small to serve the increasing membership of the parish. The sick benefit and other societies of the parish had more than 2,300 members. In 1918, when the first church building was destroyed, 1,500 families belonged to the community. In the same year, 455 baptisms, 108 weddings, and 206 funerals were held. The founder, Károly Böhm, resigned and traveled to other places in America where Hungarians needed a priest. So a new leader was needed to build the second church.
Reverend Szepesi oversaw the building of the huge St. Elizabeth Hall first, and they were able to hold service in the hall during the construction of the new church. They had many problems with it. The winter of 1919 was so frigid that they had to stop building it. Reverend Szepesi became sick, and in 1922, the very year when they finished construction, he died.
And the first leader of the parish returned to his former position.
When Reverend Böhm came back in 1923, he worked together with 3 chaplains. At that time, 1,200 pupils attended the St. Elizabeth Parish School, and it was the most populous school in Cleveland.
The school had 14 rooms. Ursuline nuns taught 1st through 8th grade. However, St. Elizabeth was not the only place where children learned their ancient culture, history, and language. The other Hungarian churches had at least a Sunday school.
In 1945, we added on an addition to the church building, which was called the school building. In the summertime, when the regular public schools closed, we had Hungarian classes, 3 times a week. And during the summer, we came to the church and the school building and we learned the Hungarian language, reading, writing, some of the history of Hungary, and the minister usually did this. We also had a choir group, which is a very nice choir group, and we had Hungarian dances, which we learned the Hungarian steps, which Hungarian dances we should parade in, and it was a very nice youth.
Well, it had to be a very nice youth when the Lutherans were even willing to push the parochial building to the corner to make more room for the school. And on the other side of Buckeye Road, members of the Reformed Church were having a good time as well. They built a new cathedral with a 157-foot tall tower. There were seats for 1,200 people, making it exactly the same size as the St. Elizabeth Church. Why did old Hungarians build so many and such large churches? Because they served as meeting points for the community. Hungarians came together for many occasions. They had festivals, holidays, or even just building the church brought people together. Some of them were still working on the walls of the building when the choir started singing on the stairs.
The new church on Buckeye Road was built in 1949. And prior to that, we had all kind of Hungarian activities, Hungarian festivals. We had
banquets,
different banquets. We had what they call the Debreceni Vásár, which was a beautiful week of activities. They made their own food, sold it, had Hungarian children dressed as in their native costumes. We had wonderful picnics, which was enjoyed by everybody. And they had, around the holidays, caroling and things like that, which they're not doing now because people are so far apart, and you can't actually walk from house to house. You have to go by automobile, and it's the distance between one family and the other is too great, so they don't even bother with that anymore, unless...
Well, years ago, the young people were close. Everybody was close around the church. So it was all right for us to go around to the different places where we could walk. Anybody that wanted us to go, like for caroling at Christmas Eve, and they lived at a distance, when we got into cars, and then we drove over there. And we were out till about 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. And the next day, Christmas Day, we came in and we probably brought in about $300, $400 that donations that they gave, because we had a good about 15, 20 people that went out caroling on that night. And it was wonderful. It was snowing outside. We had a wonderful time doing it. Now, times have changed. Things aren't like they used to be years ago.
It's not safe. We're living in a different world.
And we don't do things like that anymore. I mean, years ago, people used to say, well, I want you to come to the house. I want you to come caroling. We'd go to the house, and they'd have food, drink. They had everything. And then from there, after we got full over there, then we went to the next house, and we sang and sang carols over there, and we gave the same thing over there. Some of us were feeling pretty good at the end of the night, about 4 o'clock, but it was a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun doing it.
Hungarians had places other than churches where they could come together. They had sport clubs. They played football, basketball, soccer. They had bowling teams. Even women liked participating in sports.
The young people were playing basketball. They had a tennis court down inside the hall. From Benedictine High School, they came over to play basketball.
There were more theaters and cinemas on Buckeye than in an average city in Hungary.
Volt valami 10, így mondjuk mi, hogy hálé.
There were about 10 halles, as we called them in Hungarian, after the English word hall.
Lehetett színeladásokat tartani, vagy táncmulatságokat. 10 volt ilyen.
There were plays and dance parties. There were 5 cinemas and a permanent theater, where they had plays every night and Hungarian movies every weekend.
Az egyik állandó magyar színház volt, minden este lehetett látni a Cseh színház.
If they didn't have a Hungarian film, then they had an American.
Magyar mozi. Ha volt magyar mozi, ha nem, akkor angol mozit mutattak.
valamelyik este elvitte magát moziba. Utána valahol megvacsorázunk, és cigányzene, jó?
Ma már csak okos ember délután, hát just is vígat ródán. A pénzedet én már van minden mulatom, kalapom-pom-pom, kalapom-pom-pom, szerembe borítom. A Svárhegyet is a fülembe húzzatom, kalapom-pom-pom, kalapom-pom-pom, a szerembe borítom. Minden gubában komoly kiveszek rót, mártól tehát sírjon a bankigazgató. A pénzedet imám a minden mulatom, kalapom-pom-pom, kalapom-pom-pom, a szerembe borítom.
Many Hungarian plays. We had Javor Pál come from Europe. We had Hajmasi Ilona in Budapest at the Reformed Church. Just like a dream.
Yes, it had to be like a dream. Except one thing. The news from Hungary was much more like a nightmare. Hungary joined Germany in the Second World War and lost again. Thousands of so-called displaced persons arrived in Cleveland.
914 óta elszigetelt életet éltek a magyarok.
Hungarians, already living on Buckeye, were almost isolated from 1914 until the end of World War II. And when the displaced persons came, it turned out that newcomers were better educated, lawyers, doctors, and they didn't respect or honor the old Americans who lived here with the culture of 19th century Hungary. This caused social troubles.
Hamar észrevették, szóval voltak társadalmi problémák emiatt.
A few years later, after the 1956 revolution, when Soviet tanks destroyed the country again, another group of Hungarians arrived. They were even more different than those who arrived after the Second World War. They were mostly young people with a communist educational background. They were not so religious, but they had a hunger for freedom and money, things they had never known before. Some of them left Hungary when the uprising started.
Úgy tették magukat, mind szabadságharcosok voltak, de aztán nem volt.
Many of them called themselves freedom fighters. In fact, only a few of them did fight. Most of them came here to make money and become rich.
Hát ők azután voltak a legjobban a pénz után, de rájöttek arra nem.
They figured out very early that they needed the help of old American Hungarians too. However, the two groups did not have much in common. The 56ers said very often, if they had been in America for so long, they would not be so poor.
Ideig Amerikába lettem volna, én nem lettem olyan szegény, mint ti vagytok.
In fact, some of the displaced persons and 56ers became millionaires, but most of them just disappeared from Buckeye Road and assimilated. The cultural differences between the old Americans and the newcomers were too big. The old inhabitants of Buckeye Road didn't want to make millions. They were proud of their beautiful homes and automobiles. They also enjoyed photographing themselves in their well-manicured gardens. They were satisfied with their jobs in the local factories, and with their more than 300 small stores, shops, and pubs in the neighborhood.
They had grocery stores, they had the Orban flowers, they had flower stores, they had
Stevens
strudels shop,
Strudel shop.
they had the dime store, they had drug stores, they had butcher shops, bakery shops, they had dress shops, they had hardware stores, and they had
beer joints.
Yeah, well, they had a lot cafes. They had little candy stores. They had we had the doctors up there. We had a lot of doctors' offices on Buckeye Road, various doctors, and the people in the area worked in these stores, and they didn't have to leave the area. I myself worked at St. Luke's Hospital. The hospital was nearby. They had the library nearby. They had Harvey Rice School, and some of our Hungarian ladies were teachers at the school, and a good many were working for the doctors. They were their secretaries, helpers, dentists. We had a couple of real nice restaurants there. The Balaton,
Rice restaurant.
yeah, Balaton, the Rice Restaurant,
Frogtown Tavern.
and what was up on 130th?
The whatchamacallit, the Louis
Orris.
Orris's Settlers Tavern.
Settlers. These were all, and they were all well-known Hungarian restaurants. They had a great following, and then they had some real nice bakeries where you could get cream slices, Hungarian kremes, and then they had, like I say, drugstores, whatever you want. They had hat stores, and they had bowling alleys, and anything a person wanted was in that area. You didn't have to leave the area.
There were so many stores, Hungarian stores on Buckeye, that they had a poster that said, "We speak English too."
By the end of the 50s, however, the neighborhood started changing. Young people didn't want to live in small, old-fashioned houses anymore. Better educated Hungarians, Slovaks, and Jews moved out to newly parceled areas and built new houses for themselves.
Young people in the neighborhood after the Second World War were of age, got married, wanted to buy a house, but there were no homes for sale in the neighborhood. Nobody wanted to sell. So consequently, they went out to the suburbs.
And what happened to the older people and their houses?
Eleinte nagyon rosszul ment az ingatlan ügynököknek.
In the beginning, the real estate business didn't go very well. So the agents figured out that they could sell several houses to black people. And then Hungarians and other whites started moving out rapidly because they didn't like the behavior of those blacks. Later, of course, there was the Black Riot and the fear.
In 1966 and 1968, African Americans who needed to extend their civil rights broke the law. They attacked whites on the streets, robbed stores, and burned down houses. Hungarians, who left their native country because of poverty and suppression, found themselves in the middle of a black uprising, which had its origins in colonial times and slavery, things the Hungarians felt they had nothing to do with.
And they were scared. Old people were attacked, and children too, when they went to school. Blacks stole and burglarized. From 1960 to 1980, 200 Hungarians were killed, and about 2,000 injured so seriously that they had to go to the hospital.
The neighborhood had changed year by year, from street to street, from house to house. As a map in a socio-economic study shows, African American home ownership didn't change too much in the 50s, but increased rapidly in the 60s in the Buckeye Road area. The process had impact on civil organizations and churches as well.
The membership of the parish declined sharply in the 60s. Just one statistical comparison. In 1953, we baptized 367 infants. 9 years later, we had only 59.
In the same year, they closed down the St. Elizabeth School. At that time, they had only 120 students, 1/10 of the Golden Age student body. In the 60s and 70s, Hungarians still had festivals and parades on Buckeye, and those who lived in the suburbs of northeast Ohio came back and paraded, danced, and remembered. time came when there were not enough people who came back from the suburbs, and there was no Hungarian festival or parade on Buckeye anymore.
In the 80s, we stopped it.
Everybody was moving out too. They got married, they moved to the west side, they moved to the east side, the Lakewood. They went all over, and it wasn't, they didn't come around anymore.
By the end of the 80s, most of the last Hungarian stores, restaurants, and pubs closed on Buckeye. The civil organizations moved away, and the churches faced difficulties too.
Hát amikor ide jöttem, rengeteg problémával álltam szembe. When I came here, we had very serious problems. First, we had to ensure that the church would not be closed and sold. Our bishop allowed us to keep it open and serve as an ethnic church. Then we were able to make preparations for the centennial jubilee of the parish.
The first Hungarian Catholic Church in America still stands and serves the community. They even opened the doors of the St. Elizabeth Hall after 25 years. New immigrants play a significant role in the survival of the parish again. Most of them come from Transylvania, just like their priest, Antal András.
After the changes in early 90s in Eastern Europe, many young families with children arrived with green card, and most of them chose to come to the St. Elizabeth on Sundays. They brought new life, and they gave us hope in the future and survival of the church.
However, there are only 2 Hungarian churches left on Buckeye. The other one is a Lutheran church with about 80 members, but they don't have a pastor. The first Hungarian Reformed Church, which celebrated its 100th anniversary in 1991, moved to Walton Hills a few years later. The Baptist, Greek Catholic, Presbyterian, and Adventist churches moved to Solon, Orne Village, and other suburbs. The old buildings were taken over by African American Baptist communities. If someone drives around the neighborhood today, it is very hard to meet a Hungarian, but there are people who still remember.
It was really, really nice back in the days. It wasn't like it is now. It was beautiful. Everybody got along, wasn't a whole lot of crime, but it was beautiful back in the days.
When I moved here, it was all white, to tell you the truth, and they started moving out when they were first moved in.
It was full of Hungarians, nice Hungarian restaurants, and the Hungarian culture was alive and well in the Buckeye area.
Well, I met one lady, lived a couple of doors down from me. She was very nice, you know. First thing she did, she wanted to hug me, and that was good.
It was a nice place with nice homes, nice flowers, and it deteriorated over the years.
Busy, very busy. All the stores was open, and it was very busy. All the shops, it had more shops than it does now. But it was very nice. You come up in here, you could shop. But now some of the stores are gone, but you still can shop pretty much. It's still nice up in here, but back in the days, you really enjoyed coming up in here.
They moved in, and the Hungarians moved out, and it wasn't a melting pot anymore.
It is difficult to find a Hungarian shop, but it is not impossible. This title says we can buy Hungarian pastry and strudel here. But where is Lucy? There are only Michael and Marika.
When I decided to move back to my hometown of Cleveland in the late 1980s, I was living in San Francisco. I had gone to culinary school there and became a baker. And I moved back to Cleveland, and a few years later answered a real estate ad for a retail bakery, and it was the old Lucy's Bakery here on Buckeye Road. It was kind of the style of baking that I wanted to be doing, so made a deal with the owner, Lucy, who was surviving from her husband and wanting to retire. I would say, you know, over the years, many of the older Hungarian families certainly moved out of this area, and during holidays, they all come back to shop. We're overwhelmed with business at the holiday like Easter or Christmas, or the Jewish holidays of Rosh Hashanah and Passover.
While Marika, who, like the founder of the bakery, is from Transylvania, gives us strudel, Michael explains that the bakery originally was located in another building, where we can find Mr. Yambor's locksmith shop.
We were here probably since about 1949. We were up the street, and the building is no longer there. Then we moved down to this building.
Well, that's all, plus the Balaton restaurant, which moved to Shaker Square. There are rumors and stories about hidden bars on Buckeye, but we were not able to locate them. We went rather to a back road tour with John Polishich, who still owns several houses here and lives in Shaker Heights, only 5 minutes driving from the place where he was born.
This is 81st. I was born here. Let's see, is the house still here? It has to be on the left side. I could not tell you which one it is.
Meg kell nézni a képet. Lehet, hogy ez.
Maybe this one.
Ez aztán az alsó Buckeye.
Now that's the lower Buckeye. Here was the big life.
Lisbon, Magyar utca. Itt is bemegyek valamelyik, bemegyek itt a Grand. Ez a Houghton.
This is the Halton. Originally, this was the Hungarian main street. They lived here.
Itt lakott sűrűn a magyarság.
Well, there are no houses now. The owners burned them down. Here were stores and houses at that time. Now it's empty.
És nagy az üresség.
This was the Slovak-Hungarian part.
Mindig az. Ott megbontják le.
They just destroyed the factory there. Here. I didn't know about it.
Tudtam.
This was the border of the city before World War I.
Világháború előtt. Valamikor Newburgh.
This was once Newburgh Township.
Szóval farmvidék volt. As a forest.
And this is the forest. Once only Hungarians lived here. If a street was closer to Buckeye, it was more Hungarian. They take out the windows now and replace it with wood and tin. Otherwise, somebody breaks in. Strange. This is a strange world.
Yes, it is a strange world. According to the 2000 census, there are more than 120,000 Hungarians in Ohio. Most of them live in northeast Ohio. A park is called Kossuth, after the great 19th century liberal politician. Another place in the city is the Mincetti Plaza, after their cardinal, who spent long years in communist prisons, and after the 1956 uprising, more than a decade in the American embassy in Budapest, before he was allowed to leave the country alive. In downtown Cleveland, in a shopping center, there is a museum dedicated to the Hungarian heritage. And every September, when Hungarian scouts come together in Parma, somebody tells a young man, once, Cleveland was the second biggest Hungarian city in the world. They lived on Buckeye. Some of them still live there. They include a priest, a baker, and a locksmith. Nobody says that there are more than 20. One of them is going to be the last Hungarian on Buckeye.
Istenem, rendelj szállást járkálást, a bújdosást, az idegen földön lakást. Adjon Isten jó éjszakát, küldje hozzánk szent angyalát, bátorítsa szívünk álmát. Adjon Isten jó éjszakát, adjon Isten jó éjszakát.